Hi, welcome to another episode of How to Go Independent. Today I've got an interview with my business partner, Chad Atkins, who was a wholesaler for many years and jumped into the financial advisor side of the business by helping another advisor go independent. So I've known Chad for about 4 years now. We've been business partners for about 3.5 years, and he's just a phenomenal guy, high character, one of the hardest working guys I know, very sharp, although he will try to make you think he's not as smart as he is. Very disarming Texas charm. But his story has always been impressive to me, to basically build a business from scratch, as he'll describe it in our conversation. I think it's very instructive for a number of reasons. One, if you're looking to change within our industry from not being an advisor, this is a great template and background and experience to hear that it can be done. I think it's a lot of work, and I don't want to discount that, but it definitely can be done, and Chad's a great success story. But also just sort of how to buy a practice. There's a lot of talk about that, or how to sell a practice. And Chad reflects on some of the, I think, lessons learned or things that he and Kay did well. But I hope to have her on at some point to talk about her perspective. So with no further ado, hope you enjoy and stick around after, and hopefully we can get some feedback from you as well. Again, find us at indiefa.com or howtogoindependent.com. And here's Chad. Today I'm talking to Chad Atkins, a former wholesaler who turned financial advisor in 2009, not too long after the bottom of the market, and has done has a lot of success with his own practice now, and has built it up, and had 2 core acquisitions that built the bulk of his business and continue to grow from there. Chad, thanks for talking to me today.
Thanks for having me.
I wanted, if you don't mind, give us a little bit of your background about what you did before you became an advisor, kind of how you got to the point where you were before you switched over from the wholesaling world to the financial advisor world.
Sure. Yeah, I watched my father be an independent advisor more on the straight insurance side, and therefore got an insurance degree coming out of college, thinking that, he played a lot of golf, had his feet on a desk, didn't work very hard, and made a pretty good living. Went straight into the insurance side, straight out of college, and just absolutely hated it. A year of, go hit your friends and family, and oh, by the way, your father had already done that, so really not much marketing out there. Found a real good fraternity brother friend from college who was working at a place called HD Vest that trained CPAs and tax professionals. Was more of a home office job opportunity there, and said they were doing good things and I should look at them. So went to HD Vest as kind of the insurance trainer in a small department that then turned into more of a financial planning unit where we were teaching the concepts and everything of holistic financial planning. I trained the mutual fund, annuity people on insurance. They trained me on their products. Then we just became a big holistic unit. Stayed there about 6 years, moved into management and moved into training of the other advisors as well as the other staff. Did a lot of traveling around the country for chapter meetings and other things to train the advisors, and just kind of became a national speaker for them. And a lot of the people who went to HD Vest ended up going into wholesaling. There's actually about 25 here in the Metroplex at one time because they're based here that all went into wholesaling. So that was kind of the natural progression. HD Vest was kind of famous for overworking, underpaying, getting a lot of young people, but cramming a lot of education down their throat with the thought process, if you're going to train a highly educated CPA, you better be a step or two ahead of them. So they pushed me for all the licenses, the CFP, the training, the kind of teacher mentality that I think you needed as both a wholesaler and more importantly as an advisor. Finally got into wholesaling and did that for, 10 to 12 years. before finally I decided that becoming an advisor made more sense for me and my family.
Cool. And what led you to that conclusion, and what was of interest to you, particularly at a pretty scary time from a market standpoint?
Well, it was kind of twofold. From an ethics side, I was really tired of seeing some of the advisors take advantage of clients to where behind a closed door they would almost laugh at how much money they were making and how little money their clients were making, that they were really doing what was best for them in their pocketbook, and they were still making a great living. And my thought process was, wow, if you did the right thing for clients, how much better would your living and how much more blessings would you end up having? The second side was really just where I thought the wholesaling world was going, and I tied it kind of to the pharmaceutical world. It seemed like they were taking the, old, ugly, very educated reps and getting rid of them and hiring 3 or 4 young, pretty things in their place. And I kind of felt like wholesaling was going the same way. They didn't care about the relationships. They didn't care about the knowledge. They didn't care about the research and all the things that I prided myself on. So really the straw that broke the camel's back was 3 years in a row at our national sales conference. They cut my compensation basically in half. The first year they made me choose which territory I wanted, wires or independents, which I was 50-50, so it cut my income in half. Worked very hard over the next 12 months to get within $5,000 of my paycheck the year before, and came up and they basically said, pick a product. Do you want annuities or you want funds? And I was doing about 50-50. So I picked the funds and the asset management, worked really hard for another 12 months, got within another $5,000 of the prior year's earnings, and came to that conference, and they basically said, we're just cutting your bips in half. And that was, for me, the straw that broke the camel's back. They were making it very apparent that hard work and rewards were not going to be money. It was just going to be the little trophy. And at the end of the day, my family needed more than a trophy. So
right,
I got very serious about how do I become an advisor, control my own destiny. If I'm willing to work hard, I'm willing to be rewarded. If I'm willing to be lazy, I will starve to death.
Gotcha. Yeah, fool me 3 times, then really shame on me, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, it was funny because my wife was there. She said, do you think they'll do it again? I said, no way. How could they? And I came back to the room and said, yeah, we got to find something else to do. And she agreed with me completely. So,
gotcha. Yeah. I could see how she would be on board on that one.
So we ended up talking to some advisors that we knew real well and trusted, and said, how do you get into it? And we were not interested in cold calling and everything else. And all of them said, why don't you tuck in or buy a book or somehow, merge into a bigger practice? And so that's what we went and tried to do. And so for, maybe 6 months, I just went around and with 12 years of wholesaling relationships, started asking some of the senior advisors, do you know anybody looking for an exit strategy? And then I found my first book, and probably should have had 2 because it was smaller in hindsight than it should have been. But
now, how many people do you think you talked to before you kind of found that connection?
I'd probably say I was real lucky. I only probably spoke to about 25 people and found somebody relatively quick. But again, I was organized. I was thinking, who is the ideal market for exiting, and it was probably the older advisor that had been there a long time and had some success but was not a rock star. And so yeah, I think I got lucky with only talking to about 20, 25 people.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's interesting. You can get into it a little bit more, but I think at some point someone builds a big enough business, they're going to have people on their team or a family member or a junior partner that's already in place. So it's kind of an interesting. You want someone who has enough to make it worth your while, but not so big where they've already got their own infrastructure. Is that kind of accurate?
Absolutely, and especially in hindsight, that made more and more sense because the bigger and better teams that you knew and respected and you felt like you could make enough money to at least support your family, they absolutely had their infrastructure built. the smaller ones that seemed like they weren't as organized, and you almost wanted to say, what in the heck are you doing? It's why you're not successful. Those are the ones that probably were more willing to talk to me in the first place.
Gotcha. Okay, and then and so you kind of talk about how you found someone. So how did that process? What did that process look like in sort of the initial discussions and coming to the conclusion and deciding to move forward?
Well, and we felt like ours was almost a divine intervention in that her one and only child was going through an ugly divorce, and he traveled for a living, and mom was a little flaky, and so the one and only grandchild was going to kind of flounder, and so she wanted to be a little more of an active grandmother. So she was looking for a partner that would give her a little more freedom to do some of that. Of course, I was looking to get in with some great relationships, maybe a little mentoring and training, and be able to buy a book. So that's, again, why we felt like it was just meant to be. We moved very, very quickly. We, talked about what's it going to look like. There was a lot of trust. Now, the nice thing for us is we were going from a 20-25% wirehouse payout going into the independent world where we were going to get 85 to 90% payout. So taking a pay cut for her was not really something we were worried about because we felt like there was 3 times more to try and split between 2 people.
Sure, that's great.
So, not to drop names or anything, but she was with Wells Fargo at the time, so they did have an independent side called Finet, which right. I knew the recruiter for very well personally, went to college with him, and all it would have required going from the wirehouse to the independent was a negative consent letter. 99.9% of your clients would come with you unless they decided they wanted to go to somebody they didn't know to stay in the wirehouse that they didn't understand. So that was one of the 3 that we looked at. We looked at a regional firm that had good presence in the Metroplex, and then we looked at what I thought was one of the biggest independent firms, and as a wholesaler for 12 years, what I thought the best independent firm was. But I also knew we would have to do a lot of the work and the transition, and there would be some things left behind versus, say, the Finet where there was a negative consent letter. Because it was her book, and really I made it her decision, we went and interviewed all 3 of them, and I was very pleased to see that when she went to the large independent that we ultimately chose, she by far felt like they had 3 generations better technology. It was about half as expensive on the internal fees whenever we really dug into it. It was just really a better long-term decision. I mean, she even said maybe we go Finet for 3 to 5 years and then we switch to that big independent. But we decided to bite the bullet and go to the big independent in the first place.
Gotcha. So you learn a lot just by kind of those interviews and looking at apples to apples to figure out what the best fit is, I guess, right?
I think that was the huge advantage for me being a wholesaler for so long is I had seen the wirehouses on the inside and the outside, the back office and some of the things that they asked me to do as a wholesaler that might not have been completely up and up. I've seen a lot of these small independents, and, you feel like you're a bigger fish in a little tiny pond with some of the really small ones, but then when you saw some of their back office operations, it was really scary on whether or not they were even going to be open 12 months from now. So, yeah, I think I was very, very lucky to have been a wholesaler and been able to see the inside and the outside of a lot of these firms.
Yeah, that's you couldn't ask for hardly a better background to have kind of a well-rounded view of the industry, especially if you're going into it with that kind of life-changing decision that you have to get right. So what was the transition process like in terms of the move? And I believe I assume you did most of the work yourself. Kind of what was that like?
Yes.
And,
I've always joked that I feel like I don't have a ton of ego. So call me president, call me janitor, just send me a paycheck. That's all I really wanted to do was support my family. So our whole marketing plan was using the 30 years of relationships and love that everybody had for her and try and get that to me as quick as possible. So we really went in as she's the senior. She would like to slow down and quit doing the grunt work. So I'm the junior. I'm going to be doing 99% of the grunt work. Every time I call you, I'm calling because she told me to. She'll be sitting in on interviews, but eventually she may slow down a little or go be a hunter instead of a gatherer. So we basically pitched that story to every single person as that's why we were doing is we were teaming up to give twice the service, twice the manpower, two heads are better than one, and that really resonated with all the clients. We had already done our research of how we wanted to run the practice, how we wanted to be a lot more fee-based than she had been in the past, how we were going to change our story a little to give better money management after the debacle of '08. And we had even decided how we were going to get in front of them and offer them on a service model more than she had had prior, and literally say every single quarter we want to offer you a review to really make sure that long term we're getting you where you need to go. The first quarter review, she did 90% of the talking. She turned it over to me, which we had already planned for about 10% of the talking. But every step of the way, she basically built me up and said how smart I was and how my background was better than her background. Just really made it a smooth transition. The second quarterly interview, she talked about 50% of the time. I talked about 50% of the time. And by the third interview, it was about 90% me, 10% her. And it was really funny watching clients. In the first interview, they were looking at her, and when I did speak, they looked back at her to see if I was lying. Second interview, they're kind of doing the same thing, but by the third interview, whenever she spoke, they'd look back at me to see if I thought she was lying.
Wow.
So again, just the build-up of how she handed it off so successfully was, I think, our whole success was we planned it up front that every chance she got, she was going to give me benefit of the doubt. She was going to build me up. She was going to make me sound like the resident expert, and that she was lucky to have me. And again, in flip side, it was me lucky to have her, but the way she acts and the way her ego was, it just worked out better than we even had planned.
That's great. That's pretty funny. About the that's what, so 6 months in between those first and third meetings, basically, somewhere around there, right?
Yep. I mean, time is a healer of a lot of things, and touches really builds up trust quickly, especially when you have the other person there longer than the average transition.
Right. So, if you don't mind giving us a sense of kind of what the terms were roughly like, or specifically if you want to talk in detail, but and then kind of how that's progressed. The short summary of that's been, as we speak, about 6 years ago or a little bit more. Kind of what does that look like, and tell us how it's gone from there, and what the economics look like.
Sure. Pretty open book, and I think that's why you asked me to do this versus some others. But when I joked about that I should have looked for two of them instead of one of them, she only had about $17 million in assets. Only about $1 million of it was annuitized. She was very transactional in her past nature. Chartist, kind of stock jockey. Her rolling gross was only about $125,000. She was literally in the penalty box and fearful that Wells Fargo was going to fire her. We moved that book over. We did some planning while we were bringing assets over. Kind of the service model that we had planned on doing was trying to capture more assets. So 12 months later, with just her $17 million book that was doing $125 of gross, 12 months later we had $23 million that was doing $250,000 of gross. So we again had some great success. I joke many times and say if I made a mistake, it's that I went annuitized. we moved everything to fee-based. And the only reason I say that might have been a mistake was the first 12 to 18 months, I literally starved to death. I had to dip into savings. I had to take a 401k loan. I probably should have cut my family's lifestyle back a little, but I didn't. We cut it a little, but not enough. So in hindsight, I probably would have done some commission work in there as well, but we really just went annuitized. Now, 3 years later, I am so glad that I did that because then it wasn't the first kind of catchphrase that we always said, work hard, play hard. If you work really hard, you can make a lot of money. If you're lazy, you're going to starve to death. That's kind of what we came to work every day thinking and working with. 3 years later, because it's all annuitized, we really didn't have to think that way anymore. It was give great service, do the right thing for the client, and everything else is already taken care of itself. So that was really the first deal. The economics is 12 months later, we were going to look at the rolling gross, and I was going to pay her because she wanted it over 15 years. So instead of the 150% that was typical in our industry at the time, I told her I'd pay her 200%, but it was stretched out over 15 years. So, do the math. If I have to pay her 15 to 20% a year for 15 years, it still means that I was making 80 to 85% on the book, and that's why our economics worked very well. Again, a big part of that was going from a 20% penalty box to a 90% independent payout. There was a lot more money to split.
Right.
Now,
and she got the benefit from the growth that you helped propel, right? That first year?
Correct. And, so it was 250 instead of the 125 that we left. Now, the other thing that I felt like I was nice on is we actually pushed it back 18 months instead of 12 months because we had some cases that were settling that we knew we were going to get annuitized. And again, I wanted it to be a win-win. I've almost felt guilty that I was making, $8,000 a month when she was making $2,000 a month or whatever the numbers were because of the way we structured the deal. Now, she's been happy, and I've been happy, so it was a win-win, but I did push that back to make it even a little more fair than initially. I could have probably tightened it down and taken a little money out of her pocket by really sticking with the 12-month instead of moving it back to 18 months.
Gotcha. Well, that makes sense. It seems like, given the nature of setting up the advisory stuff, it takes at least a few months to get rolling. So I could see where that was you want her to be incentivized, aligned with you, and it sounds like you guys were perfectly aligned. Which is sounds like it's worked out exceedingly well for both of you.
Absolutely. Now the second book that you mentioned was actually, I guess it was 3 years ago as well now. But it was a Merrill Lynch guy coming here that I had known from wholesaling. He actually had a much smaller book. He had gone from Edward Jones to Merrill Lynch, kind of talked into the wirehouse dream when they were recruiting Edward Jones people so hard, and then it just didn't end up working. He was not a Merrill Lynch guy. He was more of an independent Edward Jones kind of guy. So when he wanted to leave, he ended up only having about $100,000 gross. And he came and joined us for a year to introduce the team, and then he just absolutely left on January 1st. And then the terms of that deal was 150% over a 3-year period. So that one was not as fat for us on cash flow, but year 3, I guess month 37, whenever the deal is done, the cash flow is even stronger. So my comment there is really, out of 100%, we were only keeping 50. He was getting 50, but we're still paying him with his own money, so it was a win-win.
Right.
That book was.
I was going to say, I know that helping someone get out of that low payout environment, like you've described, there's so much more margin. It's great to help someone that's already independent, but they're already at the higher payout, so it's almost like you want to find someone that needs your help the most, if possible, and then you can create a great scenario for both of you. Yeah, I know you had some other things to comment on the second one, especially related to the kind of the pumping you up that the first seller did versus the second.
Yeah, the second one was, I guess I would say it nicely, he was struggling with his own identity. He sold a lot of, the Edward Jones initial training, and this was way back when he got in, was all one fund family, one of the 7 fund families they allowed you to do. You took a 15% haircut if you went outside those fund families, and you hit break points and did A-shares, and everything was a get it as cheap as possible mentality and go look for your next kill. And again, Edward Jones has been very successful with that old philosophy. I think they've changed it now more to relationships and even looking at a little fee-based. But he never moved from that mentality, and that's why he did not do well at Merrill Lynch either. So he did not really see what his own value was. He was not a financial planner. He was not a relationship guy. He literally thought a Vanguard or whatever the cheapest was probably the best thing. So he really fought us as we were trying to switch things towards annuitized. He wanted to act like he was super analytic, that he was the smartest guy in the room, but then when you would show studies that said, multiple fund families bring value, one fund family is not good at everything, diversification is a good thing, he would go back to 20 years prior training and spit off something about, well, cheap still wins. So we really had to fight him every single step of the way, and that's why really it made more sense for when he left, he left. We did not ask him to sit in on appointments anymore. And this one was a we, so I did have a junior partner with me on this one, a CFP as well, but he was newer in the business, did not have much of a book on his own. But he was able in literally 2 years to take that $100,000 book and turn that into $200,000. And the economics of that one I kind of mentioned was a 50-50 payout. But between the junior partner and I was getting 50% of 50, so 25, and he was getting 50% of 50, 25. But I was using my 25% to basically pay the guy's note, the 150%. So we were using, in essence, the 100,000. In essence, I was paying him 50,000 and not making a penny. And my junior partner was making 50,000 because he was doing 99% of the work. I was just mentoring him, sitting in on the first couple rounds of appointments, acting like the senior, the way I had done with my original partner. Again,
Gotcha.
Building him
so
up.
If that's,
Sorry, go ahead.
It's more of a long-term play, kind of investing, not taking cash flow, but leveraging your time. In other words, you're not spending a lot of time and haven't the last couple of years, but starting month 37, now you have some cash flow out of it. Is that accurate?
That was how I originally designed the deal, and that's why I was willing to take the long-term perspective. But my second comment would be the junior did such a great job of doubling the practice in 18 months or less that all of a sudden now I am getting a pretty nice little paycheck, but it's just going to get nicer on month 37 like you mentioned. So it ended up being a better deal than I initially had put on a piece of paper.
That's great. And I know you've got to run, but why don't you comment a little bit on kind of from my perspective and probably yours, the independent model in general, the room, bring that all together, the room that's allowed in the margins to kind of do those two deals as you've described them. It's compared to as an employee when you basically have half or less as much to work with. Go ahead and kind of touch on that and how that's affected kind of your family and your life.
Well, I mean, you already said it well. I mean, going from a 30 to 50% payout at most places to a 90% payout, there's just a lot more dollars to be able to split up. So a lot of these older advisors that maybe are worn out or just burned out, they either need a second person to revitalize them, to get them fired up again, or they need somebody that they can work with for a little while to make sure they trust them to then walk away, because clients are typically friends and family. I mean, we like these people. We're going to see them in public. We want to be able to look ourselves in the mirror and look them in the eyes. So to me, when there's that much extra money on the table, you can afford to mentor somebody on or see if they can revitalize you, but not take a major pay cut while you're doing it. So yeah, going from the, lower payouts to the higher payouts, to me was just a no-brainer. That's where we have tried to target people to look to merge or to buy out or to create teams or whatever we do, because there's just more money on the table.
Right, and a lot more ways to do it, and just it's fun when you figure out what people are looking for, and you can structure kind of a setup that should benefit everybody. Not in every case you can't do it, because you have to have realistic expectations, but it is pretty neat. And I'll let you go, but one thing I would comment on is when we talk about payoffs, we're talking about at the gross end, and obviously, the skeptics out there would say, "Oh, you have to pay for your own office, your own staff, and your own coffee, and your own paper, and your own printer toner." And we'll probably do another conversation about that at some point on how the payout works. But I guess the comment is those are all fixed expenses mostly. I mean, they're a little bit variable. When you have more business, you probably need more help and more toner. But in general, you can buy a lot of coffee and a lot of phone systems with a 30 or 40% more of a couple $100,000, right? When you say that's accurate?
Oh, that's absolutely no brainer. I mean, normally I'd say it's 50 to 60% more than what you were getting, and I almost flip that around. Is the firm that you're working
on a net
for,
basis, right? On the net basis,
yeah,
50 to 60% more net. I think that's a great estimate.
Yeah, I flip it around the other way. Of the 40, 50, 70% that your firm is keeping from you, do some math. We're supposed to be math people. We're supposed to be really technical and do the math. I mean, you can get an executive suite for $500 to $1,000 a month, depending on where you want to be. I can bring coffee from home if I'm really trying to pinch pennies. I can take people to lunch. I can do all that stuff, and let's say it's a $300,000 producer. I can spend a heck of a lot less than $200,000 a year that they're keeping out of my family's pocket right now.
If you don't want to do the math, do you know anyone that might could help you with the math? Is there anybody out there that knows the math that could show it to you?
Yeah, I think all of us would be more than happy because we've done it multiple times.
Yeah, and it's pretty exciting when you see the light bulb go on.
Well, I think that's kind of one of the reasons you and I have done some of the things we've done. As a wholesaler for 12 years, I almost felt like some of my passion coming out as an independent is now going back to friends that are still advisors and maybe the less, more restrictive, smaller payout areas, and help them see the light and maybe stop drinking the Kool-Aid, because I care about those people. I've now gone back and said, hey, independents aren't idiots. Independents do have brains. Independents do have resources. Independents do make money. It's not as bad as what you've been told for 10, 20, 30 years. So, yeah, it's kind of been a personal vendetta to go back and help people see the light.
Yeah, and it's not going to be for everybody. Obviously, there are times when it just, for whatever reason, doesn't make sense. But I think most people owe it to themselves to at least examine closely the numbers and the factors, and it's just an interesting set of circumstances. And maybe 30 years ago, the technology difference between what Merrill Lynch or Morgan Stanley had compared to an independent might have been so dramatic that you couldn't really do the job the same way, maybe. But that obviously, as technology becomes more ubiquitous and cheaper, that's kind of been blown out of the water, I think.
I think originally it was the technology. I think second it was, training. And nowadays, especially if you're talking to the advisor that's already been in the industry, they don't need much training anymore because they found out the wirehouses didn't give them much training. But then I think the third one, and I believe you worked for Morgan Stanley for a while, the name recognition really helped in some of the prospecting for a while, where now most of those people are telling me that is a disadvantage. That name recognition is hurting me now, not helping me, the way it might have 10 years ago. So, yeah, I think the world has changed. I don't think independence is for everybody, but I think if you give it an honest look, it helps a lot more people than most people realize, I believe.
Not surprisingly, I agree. All right, well, I appreciate the time, Chad, and if you have any other final thoughts, I know you need to probably bounce, but anything else you want to share or thoughts, or I think we've pretty much covered it?
I think we covered it all. Thanks for doing it, and call me if you got any other questions.
All right, thanks, Chad.
And there you have it. I think a great story. Really admire what Chad has built. Of course, he and I and Brandon Day have also built another business together. It's even more remarkable to me that he's done this from scratch, basically in 2 different businesses. So enjoy working with him and love hearing that story. One thing I want to ask feedback, if you know anyone that's bought a practice, or if you've bought or sold a practice, or if you have questions around that, please shoot me a note or post a comment or get a hold of us one way or another. Love to hear your story. Either kind of have an in-depth discussion like this, or just to have lessons learned that I can share with others. So go to indyfa.com or howtogoindependent.com and let me know what you think or your experience. Thanks again, and more soon.